Hello, this is Joe. I go by Sedenions on YouTube and also Sovereign Node, right, on my Discord. I wanted to talk about consciousness and maybe lay out a certain type of pedagogical framework for it, something that people can use to get to different meta states. So it may start off at the most fundamental or highest rung as a what I call an unmonad or a diffracting, as a self-evident diffracting information diffracting flow on a sphere or Ouroboros that eats itself back up. And essentially that's mind and the diffracting patterns or fractals is world. So nobody's really there yet. Not at the level of temperature, negentropic temperature tuning that would allow you to hyperparameterize your reality such that you can do whatever you see fit without forgetting who you are or what you are. Beneath that is what I guess there's infinite rungs, right? There's infinite ways we can mathematically model what's going on, or what can go on. So I'll talk about three rungs. Um, the, I guess, spline panning of a discrete guidance algorithm or guidance stream, and then also the spline panning of the continuous or curved geometry guidance system, which is more, these all have concepts attached to them. And then finally, I guess we'll talk about the monad, not to be confused with the unmonad. So essentially, you have let's talk about spline panning on a discrete guidance algorithm. You A lot of people may find themselves under this rung, where that's just total forgetfulness. But this assumes you learn a model where you you understand you are a bunch of saccades of the eyes, head and neck movements of the superior colliculi, and brachial plexi movements and lumboplexi movements of the arms and legs and their appendages are interdigitating. Uh, what is the word? Opposable thumbs and jointed, you know, actuators, your fingers. And same with your toes to an extent, right? Not everyone has control over their toes. There's a whole field of toe yoga out there, a whole discipline. But this is the state where people can find themselves in through meditating or contemplative exercise and contemplative medicine, where they find themselves in a state where, yes, they can move around, but they're still guided, just like a spline. They're guided, they're a function guided by world constraints, worldly constraints, right? So this could be anything from people, objects, papers, economies, electrons, buildings, uh, traffic patterns, being in traffic. You find yourself in this state, and there's it depending on your priors, your beliefs, your abstract beliefs, not your conventional beliefs. Like, is the stove on or off? That in itself is a superposition, but you need, unless you have obsessive compulsive disorder, you don't need to worry about that. You find yourself being able to decompose that, what I'll call constraint or grammar in a higher level understanding. Um, you essentially have this movement, right? And you can almost, depending on your priors, move the certain trajectories of the guidance algorithm, the worldly constraints. What do you have access and control over? Your thoughts, that extra or W dimension, if you will, that appears outside of your animated embodiment, which is you, your body. Um, and they people are now saying empirically that thoughts are something that is outside you, or that EEG is not only a proxy, but just a waveform that extends outside the body and is representative of thoughts like motor and sensory imagery. So that's great. Let's just go to the higher rung for context. A more continuous guidance algorithm would imply that you've already understood some realization about the world, some belief, abstract belief modification, such that you can, for example, the concept that I would attach to this one is psychic, panpsychic, or uh, paranormal, right? So to make it to make the distinction between the first rung I mentioned and the second rung I mentioned now, let's talk about the social arena or social psychology. You typically have people like Alice and Bob. I'll be Bob, and I'm talking to Alice at work. And when I see Alice, I get her facial expressions, I get, and I, could react to that, right? Or I could just respond to it depending on my realization or my when I say realization, essentially mean my negentropic tuning or how much order I possess about the scenario. So you have this, but then what typically happens with people with low negentropy is they get into the grammars of theory of mind or the constraints of theory of mind, where first of all, it's already a theory, right? So it's separate and distinct from what actually could be going on inside Alice's mind. But most importantly, it creates noise and latency in the communication between Alice and Bob. When you get to the continuous guidance uh, algorithm for the spline panning, and in which again you're moving around, you're walking through reality, right? You see that okay, um, there is no, there either is no need to have a mind for Alice or a projection of her mind back being fed back to me as a way for me to make inference. But there is also could be an ontology on this same level where you just assume that people are, it's almost the inverse. It's like uh, feed forward instead of feedback. That whatever Alice is thinking, probabilistically, um, I am more or less thinking. And this can be dangerous if you don't tune it right. And it's something what tuning is has to do with not only contemplation, but I would argue morality. And if you don't have a sense of morality, first of all, that is a grammar and constraint in itself. But if you don't have it as a prior that you can then decompose when you get to this negentropic order, um, learned state on the perceptual negentropy gradient, you cannot, you know, I lost my train of thought. But you see what I'm saying? Like there's a level of tuning going on. Why is it continuous? Because you sort of also realize that instead of discrete, mostly I mean to illustrate the curvature of this, how it's no longer about static packets of probabilities going back and forth and, or really just gravitating and attracting toward the central node, the sovereign node. It is more along the lines of just information diffusing in an outward fashion from me back to me, which again goes back to the unmonad. I'm almost, I like to play at the highest level or try to anyway. So it doesn't always make sense. But really when you assume psychic or telepathy, you get a sort of free lunch, which is social euthymia. Um, when you do this, it's great. And we could also talk about traffic patterns, right, on this order. Like on these rungs. Like, why is traffic seem so orderly from a contemplative medicine or contemplative exercise perspective? Um, it wants to inch you closer and closer and convince you, the system anyway, into realizing or collapsing on the meta fact or the um, the meta manifestation that this world is generated, not, you know, perceived per se. I mean, you're perceiving the generation, so it is perception, but it's not like, how you say, like, it it's not, if Alice is a radio tower and I'm a radio tower and the carrier wave is going from A to B, right? It's actually more like the carrier wave is going from A to A and B and everything else, like C, D, W, X, everything, every variable is fed back into Alice. Alice is the central node or sovereign node of her experience. And it's hard for a lot of people to come to grips with. And also, it's hard for me to come to grips with because this realization a lot of the time wanes with the day. When you're most wakeful and you're ready to receive it, the insight, and have it grow on you, literally, or metaphorically, I should say, because I don't want to add more geometry, unnecessary constraints to this. Um, you realize that your world and body, even your superior colliculus and saccadic movements are all part of a monadic update rule, feedback rule. So it's hard to understand, but it can't really be put in language because language in itself is grammar and trying to chase its own tail. So we would call this the cat and mouse model, where and it's also quantum inspired, but even quantum is, a relative frame of the absolute, if you will. It's not basal fundamentalium. You are basal fundamentalium. And when you can realize this, you get to actually tune. That's what the negentropic tuning is, between these rungs of realization. And yes, there are more than three. Yes, they are domain independent. So whatever you're doing, you can perform like a Robert Bjorkian transfer of learning to another scenario that's not related to the social scene or radio communication scene. You can be any domain where you see, this stuff happen. And if you're curious, a lot of people would just argue from a lower rung and then make me seem like I have some type of special knowledge, gatekeeping or gate kept special knowledge. That, oh, you're just experiencing novelty and serendipity and coincidence detection on steroids, which is a sign of mental illness. Well, I mean, if you want to cave in the world, or shoehorn the world, then yeah. But it's much more than that. It's actually tuning your reality. It's reality programming, as they say, reality testing. So I hope this video helped. I don't want to make it too long. I will say, when I said perceptual negentropy gradient, I literally mean the state that is most ordered at the top, and then you learn that, and then you descend or catastrophically forget, which is, I would imagine and hypothesize, is death, when you catastrophically forget everything and enter into a lower rung of realization, or a diffracted rung. It may not be lower, or it may be, if you invoke karma as an abstract belief and the mechanisms that follow from that and diffract from that, um, you can go up, right? You can rebirth and as someone else, right? Who's more rich or powerful, if that's what your objective function is. But that's the thing, right? We can actually do this in this lifetime, as long as we keep healthy to our definition of that, that allows us to, it's actually not our definition, but our world's definition. The constraint or reflection of health is what we see in other people and what we need to emulate. Similarly, when you get these metaphysical thoughts in tune, or, you gather them, you can start to emulate your own metaphysics, which allows you to your own ontological commitments, which allow you to perceive the same world. And here's the trick, right? Because it's not just the same world overladen with novelty. It can be if you want to seek power, but if you want to play the game right, and there's no right or wrong way to play, but in my opinion, I would say you change the world model along with your manifestation or your realization. So I could be on a yacht next week, but I don't want to. And this is where people start to see charlatanism reflecting from me to them. But that's not the case. It's just a matter of it's like skill trees in a video game. Like, what do you want to allocate skill points to? And if I didn't allocate enough skill points to that, then it's going to take more time to allocate skill points to this. Um, so I hope that makes sense. And I don't want to make the video too long because it is pedagogical and I'm looking for a review from two of my mentors. So thank you very much. And I hope you have a happy 2026.